All right, let's get straight into it. If you're tackling medieval England for your exams, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to cut through all the noise and focus on the key ideas that are going to help you absolutely smash those top grades. Let's do this.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to break this down into 5 key chunks. We'll kick things off with Anglo-Saxon justice, then see how everything got turned on its head when the Normans arrived in 1066. After that, we'll look at who was actually keeping the peace, dig into the massive power of the church, and finally, and this is the important bit, we'll get into how to turn all this info into a grade 9 answer. Okay, so first things first, let's rewind the clock to before 1066. Forget everything you know about police forces and national laws. In Anglo-Saxon England, justice was, well, it was a totally local affair, handled right there by the community itself.
Now, let me ask you a question, and I know it sounds a bit strange today, but if someone hurt a member of your family, what would you want? Revenge? Or would you want cash? It seems crazy to us, but this question gets right to the heart of the Anglo-Saxon mindset. You see, their whole system was less about punishment and more about stopping one crime from spiraling into an all-out war between families. And the answer, believe it or not, was often money. This system had a name, the Guild. And here's the really fascinating part. A crime wasn't seen as an offense against the state or the law. Nope. It was a personal attack on a specific person and their family. So the Guild, which literally means man price, was a form of compensation paid to stop that cycle of revenge. And get this, they had a price for everything. Every person, every arm, every finger had a specific value. So how did they actually catch anyone? Well, again, it was all down to the community. Picture this. You witnessed a crime. You had to shout your lungs out and raise the hue and cry. And then the entire village had to stop what they were doing, farming, blacksmithing, whatever, and join the chase. If you didn't join in, you got fined. That, and these little groups called tithings, where 10 men were responsible for each other, just perfectly shows this whole idea of collective community responsibility.
And then, bam! 1066 happens, the Norman conquest. This wasn't just a new guy on the throne. This was a total game changer for law and order in England. William the Conqueror needed to stamp his authority on the country, and fast. And his #1 tool for doing that, the justice system.
And the shift was massive. All of a sudden, a crime wasn't just against a person, it was an offense against the king's peace. That one little phrase changed everything. Now all authority came from the king. The old Wargel system, gone. Fines were now paid straight into the king's pockets. And punishments got way, way harsher. We're talking public executions, mutilations, stuff designed as a brutal deterrent to show everyone exactly who was in charge now.
And if you want a perfect example of this new royal power, look no further than the forest laws. William I basically pointed at huge areas of England and said, "That's mine, my personal hunting ground." This made things that ordinary people had done for centuries, like hunting for food or gathering firewood, into serious crimes. These became social crimes, acts that were illegal, but that most people didn't actually think were wrong. So the king's got all this new power on paper, but how did he actually enforce it on the ground? In every little town and village across the country? Well, the answer is a real mix of the old ways and the new. You still had community roles hanging around, like the tithings and the new parish constable, so local involvement was still vital. But overseeing it all was a powerful new figure, the sheriff. He wasn't a local. He was the king's man in the county, the ultimate authority. And this really shows you the direction things were heading, a slow but steady shift away from community power towards centralized royal control. But the king wasn't the only major player here. The medieval church was immensely powerful, and crucially, it had its own courts and its own system of justice that often challenged the king's authority, big time. The right of sanctuary is a perfect example. A wanted criminal could literally run into any church, and the king's men couldn't touch them. The church door basically acted like a force field against the king's law. This just shows the incredible legal independence and authority that the church held. Then there was the benefit of the clergy. This meant anyone connected to the church could be tried in the much more lenient church courts, where punishments were far less severe. And how did you prove you were a clergyman? You just had to read a passage from the Bible. Well, as you can imagine, criminals quickly memorized that one verse. It became this famous get-out-of-jail-free card. And finally, trial by ordeal. This was where guilt was supposedly decided by God, seeing if a burn from a hot iron healed cleanly. But the key point for your exam isn't really what it was, but why it ended.
In 1215, the Pope told priests to stop being involved. Without the church, the whole system just collapsed. This forced England to find a new method for trials, and that led directly to the wider use of juries. A massive, massive development.
Okay, so you've got the knowledge. Now let's talk about how we turn that into top barks. This right here is the secret sauce. It's the difference between just telling the story and explaining why the story actually matters.
Right. Listen closely, because this is the single biggest difference maker. A good answer describes what happened. A grade 9 answer explains the significance. So you don't just say the forest laws were introduced. You say the forest laws are significant because they demonstrate the consolidation of royal power, redefining crime as an act against the king, not just the community. You see? You have to explain the so what.
So let's boil it all down. For every point you make, ask yourself, why was this significant? If you're talking about change, link it to the growing power of the king. If you're talking about things that stayed the same, what we call continuity, link it to the influence of the local community or the church. Use those key terms accurately and make sure you're explaining both what changed and what stayed the same over the whole 500-year period.
And that brings us to our final thought. As you revise, keep this one question in your mind. When you look at the War Guild, the forest laws, and the role of the church, was the legal system in medieval England truly about finding justice for victims? Or was it a tool used by kings and priests to establish and maintain their power? Thinking like that, that's how you nail a grade 9. Good luck.